Everything you were taught about when human civilization began is wrong by 190,000 years. You were told that humans only developed agriculture 10,000 years ago, that we built our first cities 6,000 years ago, and that anything before that was primitive hunter-gatherers with no capacity for complex thought or monumental construction. But off the coast of South Africa, underwater archaeological surveys have discovered massive stone structures, perfectly aligned megalithic circles, and engineered platforms that could not have been built by accident or natural geological processes. These are not natural rock formations. These are construction projects. And the dating is undeniable. These structures were built on dry land before the sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, which means they are at least 12,000 years old. But the evidence gets even more disturbing. Linked to these submerged sites is Adam's Calendar, a massive stone circle in Mpumalanga, South Africa, that has been archaeoastronomically dated to approximately 75,000 years old, with some researchers arguing the site could be as old as 200,000 years based on erosion patterns and geological context. If these dates are even remotely accurate, it means advanced human civilization existed in southern Africa not thousands of years ago, but hundreds of thousands of years ago during a period when mainstream archaeology insists humans were incapable of abstract thought. This is not a fringe theory. This is physical evidence that has been deliberately ignored, dismissed, and suppressed because accepting it would require rewriting every textbook, abandoning every established timeline, and admitting that the story of human civilization has been fundamentally wrong from the beginning. The timeline of human civilization is not just an academic curiosity. It is the foundation of how we understand progress, development, and the very nature of human potential. The standard narrative is linear and comforting. We started as primitive beings, slowly developed language and tools, eventually discovered agriculture, and then exploded into the complex civilizations we see today. This narrative serves a purpose. It positions modern industrial society as the inevitable pinnacle of human achievement, and suggests that anyone who has not followed this exact developmental path is somehow backward or less evolved. It has been used to justify colonialism, to rationalize the destruction of indigenous knowledge systems, and to maintain hierarchies of power based on claims of civilizational superiority. But what if the timeline is wrong? What if advanced human societies rose, thrived, and fell multiple times over hundreds of thousands of years, leaving only the faintest traces? The implications would be catastrophic for established institutions. Every major museum, every anthropology department, every archaeology program in the world teaches the same basic timeline. Anatomically modern humans emerged around 300,000 years ago, but behavioral modernity, the capacity for symbolic thought, art, and complex social organization, only emerged around 50,000 years ago. This is called the Great Leap Forward theory, and it is the bedrock of modern paleoanthropology. The submerged megaliths off South Africa and the Adam's Calendar site directly contradict this theory. They suggest that humans were building astronomically aligned stone monuments at a time when they were supposedly incapable of abstract reasoning. The stakes extend beyond academia. If civilizations rose and fell before our current one, it means that technological advancement is not permanent or inevitable. It means we are not special. It means everything we have built could vanish just as completely as the civilizations that came before us, leaving future archaeologists to wonder if we ever existed at all. And that terrifying possibility is precisely why the evidence has been buried. Because confronting it would force us to question not just our past, but the fragility of our future. The story begins not underwater, but in the mountains of Mpumalanga, South Africa, where a pilot named Johan Heine noticed something unusual while flying over his land in 2003. From the air, he could see a massive circular stone structure, partially buried and overgrown, but clearly artificial. The circle measured approximately 30 meters in diameter and was constructed from dolerite stone blocks, some weighing several tons. Heine contacted Michael Tellinger, a South African author and researcher, and together they began investigating the site. What they found was extraordinary. The stone circle was not just a random pile of rocks. It was a precisely engineered structure with alignments that corresponded to cardinal directions and celestial events. More disturbingly, the stones showed evidence of extreme weathering and erosion. far more than would be expected from structures known to be a few thousand years old. Tellinger brought in archaeoastronomer Richard Wade to analyze the site's alignments. Wade discovered that the stone circle aligned perfectly with the rise of Orion's belt on the horizon, but only as it would have appeared thousands of years ago due to precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that changes the position of stars over long time periods. By calculating when Orion would have risen at the angle marked by the stones, Wade initially estimated the site could be 75,000 years old. Later analysis considering erosion rates and geological context suggested it could be even older, potentially as old as 200,000 years. These dates were immediately dismissed by mainstream archaeologists as impossible. Humans 75,000 years ago were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. The idea that they could construct astronomically aligned megaliths was rejected out of hand, not because the evidence was flawed, but because it contradicted established theory. But the Adams Calendar site is not isolated. The region around it contains thousands of similar stone circles and structures, covering an area of approximately 10,000 square kilometers. Aerial surveys and satellite imagery have revealed a vast network of interconnected stone ruins, terraces, and what appear to be ancient agricultural channels. This is not a single monument built by a small group. This is evidence of large-scale, organized society. And then came the underwater discoveries. In 2001, marine geologist Nick Fleming surveyed the continental shelf off the South African coast and discovered stone structures submerged at depths consistent with sea level positions from 12,000 years ago. The structures included circular formations, linear walls, and what appeared to be deliberately placed standing stones. Subsequent surveys by underwater archaeologists found additional sites, all showing evidence of human modification and construction. These sites could only have been built on dry land, which means they date to before the post-glacial sea level rise, placing them at a minimum age of 12,000 years, but potentially much older if they were built on coastal plains that were above sea level during earlier glacial periods. The response from mainstream archaeology to both Adams' Calendar and the submerged megaliths has been uniform denial and dismissal. Critics argue that the stone circles are natural geological formations, despite the clear evidence of deliberate placement and astronomical alignment. They claim the erosion dating is unreliable, despite the fact that similar techniques are used to date other archaeological sites without controversy. They suggest that the underwater structures are just unusual rock formations shaped by currents and tides, despite underwater archaeologists identifying clear evidence of quarrying, shaping, and deliberate construction. The pattern is familiar. When evidence challenges established timelines, the evidence is explained away rather than investigated. But the erasure goes deeper than simple skepticism. Funding requests to conduct systematic excavation and dating of the South African stone circles have been repeatedly denied. Applications to perform underwater archaeological surveys of the submerged structures have been blocked or deprioritized. Researchers who advocate for serious investigation of these sites have been marginalized, their work dismissed as pseudo-archaeology, and their careers damaged. The hostility is not due to lack of precedent for revising timelines. Archaeology has repeatedly pushed back the dates of human achievements when confronted with undeniable evidence. In the 1990s, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey forced archaeologists to accept that humans were building massive stone temples 11,500 years ago, thousands of years before they were supposed to have the organizational capacity for such projects. The response was eventually to accept the evidence and revise the timeline. But Göbekli Tepe only pushed back the timeline by a few thousand years. Adams' Calendar pushes it back by tens of thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of years. That is a revision so massive that it would invalidate entire careers, discredit established theories, and force a complete reconceptualization of human cognitive and cultural evolution. So instead of investigating, the establishment has chosen to ignore. Papers submitted to mainstream archaeological journals about these sites are rejected without peer review. Conference presentations are declined. The evidence is quarantined, treated as if it does not exist because acknowledging it would require too much disruption. The erasure is also geographical. If these structures were discovered in Europe or the Middle East, they would receive immediate attention, funding, and media coverage. But because they are in southern Africa, they can be safely ignored. The implicit bias is clear. Africa is where humans originated, but not where they first developed civilization. That is supposed to have happened elsewhere, in Mesopotamia or Egypt, conveniently located in regions that have been traditionally considered the cradle of Western civilization. The idea that the first advanced human societies might have emerged in sub-Saharan Africa, tens of thousands of years before agriculture was supposed to exist, is ideologically unacceptable. It threatens not just archaeological timelines, but the entire narrative of civilizational development that has positioned certain regions and certain peoples as the natural leaders of human progress. And so the evidence is buried, not under sand and stone, but under institutional resistance and deliberate neglect. The physical evidence for the antiquity and artificiality of these sites is overwhelming. The stones at Adam's calendar show tool marks, evidence that they were shaped and positioned deliberately. Geological analysis confirms that the dolerite blocks used in construction do not occur naturally in circular arrangements and would have required deliberate quarrying and transport. The astronomical alignments are too precise to be coincidental. Multiple independent researchers have confirmed that the site marks solar and stellar events with accuracy that requires both long-term observation and mathematical knowledge. This is not something that happens by accident. Natural rock formations do not align with celestial events. Only deliberately constructed monuments do. And the erosion patterns on the stones are consistent with exposure to weathering over tens of thousands of years, far longer than any known historical civilization in the region. The underwater structures provide even stronger evidence because their position eliminates any ambiguity about dating. Sea level curves for the past 20,000 years are well established through multiple independent lines of evidence, including ice cores, coral growth records, and sediment analysis. We know exactly when the South African continental shelf was above water and when it was submerged. Structures found at depths of 100 to 120 meters below current sea level would have been built on dry land no later than 12,000 years ago, and potentially much earlier if they were constructed during earlier low sea level periods. The structures themselves show evidence of deliberate construction. Stone blocks have been identified that do not match the surrounding geology, indicating they were transported from elsewhere. Linear features show regular spacing and alignment, inconsistent with natural geological processes. And sonar imaging has revealed what appear to be roads or pathways connecting different structural elements, exactly what you would expect from a constructed settlement rather than random rock formations. The comparative evidence from other sites supports the possibility of much earlier civilizations. Göbekli Tepe proved that complex monument construction predates agriculture by thousands of years. Sites like Karahan Tepe and Bonkuklu Tarla in Turkey have pushed the dates of megalithic construction even further back. In Indonesia, Gunung Padang has controversial dating suggesting human modification of a natural hill as early as 20,000 years ago, with some researchers arguing for even older dates. These discoveries are slowly forcing archaeology to accept that the timeline of human capability is much older than previously believed. But the South African evidence goes further. It suggests not just that humans built monuments earlier than we thought, but that they built them far earlier, during periods when mainstream theory insists they were cognitively incapable of such achievements. The only reason this evidence has not forced a similar revision is because it has not been seriously investigated. If even a fraction of the resources devoted to excavating sites in Europe and the Middle East were directed toward the South African stone circles and submerged structures, we would have definitive answers about their age and origin within a few years. The final piece of evidence comes from mythology and oral tradition. The indigenous peoples of southern Africa have stories of ancient civilizations, great floods, and lost knowledge. The Zulu and Xhosa traditions speak of the first people who built in stone and understood the movements of the stars. These accounts have been dismissed as myths, but archaeology has repeatedly shown that oral traditions often preserve genuine historical memory over thousands of years. The Aboriginal Australians have oral traditions describing the flooding of coastal lands that match geological evidence of sea level rise 10,000 years ago. Mediterranean cultures have flood myths that may preserve memories of the Black Sea deluge 7,500 years ago. If Southern African oral traditions preserve memories of civilizations from the deep past, They deserve to be taken seriously as potential historical evidence rather than dismissed as folklore. So let us return to the question we began with. Why have the submerged megaliths off South Africa and the Adams Calendar site been ignored and dismissed rather than systematically investigated? Because accepting them as genuine evidence of ancient advanced civilization would destroy the comfortable linear narrative of human progress. It would mean that we are not the first technological society to inhabit this planet. It would mean that civilizations can rise to great heights and then collapse so completely that only underwater ruins and weathered stones remain. And it would mean that the timelines we teach, the theories we defend, and the entire framework we use to understand human history are fundamentally inadequate. The establishment cannot accept this because it has too much invested in the current paradigm. Careers have been built on the timeline of human civilization. Textbooks have been written. Museum exhibitions have been designed. And all of it is based on the assumption that behavioral modernity emerged around 50,000 years ago, and that complex civilization only began with agriculture 10,000 years ago. But the stones do not lie. They sit there in the mountains of Mpumalanga, aligned with ancient star positions, eroded by millennia of weathering, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. And beneath the waves off the South African coast, stone structures mark the places where people once lived, built, and thrived before the rising seas claimed their world. These are not mysteries. They are evidence. Evidence that has been rejected not because it is weak, but because it is too strong, too disruptive, too dangerous to the established order. The Adams Calendar civilization, if that is what we are looking at, did not leave written records or metal artifacts that could survive 200,000 years of geological time. But they left stone, the only human construction that can endure across such vast timescales. And those stones are trying to tell us something. That human history is not a simple story of linear progress from primitive to advanced, but a complex cycle of rise and fall, of civilizations that emerged, flourished, and vanished, leaving only the faintest traces for us to puzzle over. Now that you know the truth, you can never look at human history the same way again. We are not the first. We may not even be the second or third. And if previous civilizations could vanish so completely that we debate whether they ever existed, what does that say about the permanence of our own achievements? The submerged megaliths are not just ancient ruins. They are a warning. They tell us that everything we have built, every city, every technology, every monument, could be erased by time, leaving future archaeologists to argue about whether we were capable of the things we accomplished. This is history rewritten, where we dive beneath the waves and dig into the stone to uncover the civilizations they erased. Subscribe, because the deeper we go into the past, the more we realize that human history is not a story of constant progress, but a cycle of forgetting and remembering. And the truth is always more humbling than they want you to know.